Welcome to the Roetzel Health Law Hotspot. Health Law Hotspot is a podcast for physicians and health professionals that covers the legal issues and trends that affect the healthcare industry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Health Law Hotspot. I'm Ericka Adler, shareholder and leader of the healthcare practice at Roetzel and Andrus. Today, I'm joined by shareholder Christina Kuta, who's also part of our health law practice. And we're going to be talking about GLP and GLP-1 weight loss drugs, which have become super popular. But a lot of people are not asking questions about the legality of dispensing those drugs, and on the consumer side, whether they're receiving it from an individual from whom they should be receiving it. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Christina, why don't you jump in and tell us a little bit about what's going on with these weight loss drugs and some of the concerns that you have?
Sure. So, as anyone watching this knows, proliferation of these weight loss drugs recently in the market, probably over the past year or so. Very popular drugs, and for a lot of people, very successful drugs with regard to weight loss. So, there's a significant demand to physicians and medical spas and other areas of patients that want these medications. Because of that, there's been some shortages. And because of the shortages, there's led to some shortcuts regarding these medications that are now sort of causing problems for a lot of practices and facilities that have been finding creative ways to bring these GLP and GLP type 1 drugs to patients. And I think one of the two main issues we have with these medications and how they're being dispensed is who's prescribing and who's dispensing. As Ericka indicated, there are rules on this. You cannot just open a facility as a dietitian, let's say, get GLP-1 or GLP drugs on the internet marketplace and provide those to patients. And I have heard of that actually happening. That's not allowed. You have to have a prescription from someone who is authorized by their scope of practice to actually prescribe the drug. So physician assistant, physician, nurse practitioner generally are the professions that are allowed to do that. Also, if a drug is going to be distributed, it has to be distributed generally by a healthcare provider in office or by a pharmacy. So in the example I gave of someone starting a weight loss clinic and not being a physician or a mid-level provider and dispensing GLP medications that they helped their patients actually obtain on the internet, that's not lawful. There has to be specific rules that are met for dispensing. And when you dispense in office as a prescriber that's allowed to actually prescribe these medications, your state will have rules on what's allowed, what you can dispense, how it can be dispensed, what records need to be kept. So even if you're a physician, you can write a prescription for one of these medications. How you dispense it to your patients if you choose to sell it as part of your practice is subject to laws.
Now, there are a lot of online services, and some of these services are outside insurance. Some of them are telling the patients that, they can try submitting it to insurance, and some are saying just to make it, part of your cafeteria plan submission. So these doctors are online, and one of the things that you need to be thinking about if you're either the doctor or the patient is where are you sitting physically, right? So if you're an Illinois patient and your doctor's in California, they really need to be licensed in Illinois to be talking to you about prescribing the drug, and they need to have the authority to be able to prescribe that drug. I'm not, obviously the expert on FDA regulation, but a lot of these doctors have set up structures where they're a network of physicians and other providers licensed across every state and with relationships with pharmacies in every state. So it is very likely that if you're going to a legitimate online physician, that it is being done properly. But I think a lot of places want to kind of get in on the action, and they have not necessarily done the research or taken the time. So if you're seeing this being advertised online and you're buying it online, You want to make sure the provider is licensed in the state you're sitting in and that all the other requirements have been met. And if you're a doctor that wants to get in on it, please be aware you cannot have a patient visit with a patient that is in a state in which you're not licensed. These laws are perhaps a little outdated for what telemedicine has made possible, but that is the way the law is right now. So,
Absolutely. And I think too, talking about going onto the website and seeing these being advertised and wondering if it's a legitimate operation. The other issue is, what kind of medication are you getting? There's significant shortages of these medications, have been over time, and some still exist. So when that happens, the FDA allows for certain compound drugs to be made, which is supposed to have the same components of the FDA approved drugs and made up by generally specific compounding pharmacies. So what's happening is a lot of practices are selling or dispensing these medications to their patients. They're the compound medications. They're not the actual FDA approved GLP and GLP-1s. And the FDA has started to put out guidance that says if we're not in a shortage, these medications shouldn't be made. Also, there's sort of a buyer beware. What is actually in that vial you're getting? If it's not FDA approved, did the compounding pharmacy do it correctly? Is somebody else putting medications together to try to approximate the ingredients that are in these GLP and GLP-1 drugs? Are they successfully doing that? So there's a lot of concern as a consumer on what you're actually buying. And because a lot of these drugs, these compound drugs are being sold, there's become a proliferation of related lawsuits. So practices are now being sued by the manufacturers of these GLP and GLP-1 drugs for selling the compound drugs, but basically is sort of making it seem like they're FDA approved or the exact equivalent, or they're not compounded. I'm aware of at least one practice that's been sued recently by a manufacturer related to selling compound Ozempic. Also, some states have gotten on sort of the lawsuit bandwagon. And recently, and just here in Illinois, the Attorney General sent cease and desist letters to certain practices. They're actually marketed as medical spas. And the cease and desist was related to marketing weight loss drugs as the same as the FDA approved medications, not telling patients what were in the drugs and making it seem like, in the brand name Ozempic, for example, that the vial they're getting is exactly the same thing as Ozempic and FDA approved when it's not. And I would expect more states will follow suit as we continue to see, a lot of people want to get in on the potential profit of selling these drugs, and also for patients who believe they're effective for weight loss and want to be able to have access to them even when there's shortages in place.
all right. So just to summarize here, from the provider perspective, if this is something that you want to do, you want to make sure that within your office, you, your staff, whoever you're using is trained properly in using these medications. You're obtaining it from an appropriate source. You're storing it appropriately. You're maintaining patient records like you would with any other treatment. And you are not advertising it improperly. That would open the door to you being questioned, whether it's compound drugs, whether you're claiming it's for a use for which it's not intended, or whether you are otherwise putting yourself at risk by the way you're marketing it. So just because this is very popular, if you're thinking of jumping on this, you want to just be very careful. Also, if you're a physician office that is thinking of doing it online, you want to make sure that you're limiting your interaction with patients to those that are sitting in a state in which you're licensed and that you have made appropriate arrangements for appropriate drugs that meet all state and federal requirements. So we're not by any means saying that physicians and other providers can't get in on this, but there are some things to think about. Correct. And so from the provider perspective, we do suggest you talk with counsel. You'll also want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. If, I've seen a lot of practices that are prescribing that literally this is not the business they're in, right? It's become a source of income. You're an practice, but now you're selling semi-glutides, right? How have you, what about your malpractice? Does it apply to anything other than orthopedic medicine? So think about the different ways that expanding into a new area of healthcare might uh, implicate your practice. Additional item, and Christina, jump in anytime, is that we recently did a podcast where we talked about Botox parties. Okay. We're actually seeing home visits with these kinds of injections as well. And the same rules apply. Is it appropriate? Is a record being kept? Is the person injecting it allowed to be injecting it? How are those drugs being stored and transported? So it's unusual to think of this, but we're seeing weight loss parties just Botox parties.
Yeah, same rules apply and same considerations apply. Infection control in the home where you're at or the facility where you're at when this is happening, making sure that it's appropriate to be done, making sure that it's prescribed appropriately. And if it is prescribed, there's necessity for the prescription. There's been an evaluation done. One of the things we haven't touched on here is there is a number of poor side effects that are being reported, particularly with the compound medications. So you want to make sure if this is being prescribed and given to a patient, that they're an appropriate candidate for it. They understand the risks, understand the potential benefits. That will also help you again as a provider from a malpractice perspective and from a licensing perspective. If you're an orthopedic physician, let's say, who's decided to get into the business of weight loss drugs, and you know that's not your the typical type of practice you might have, and you're not carefully explaining to patients what they're receiving, prescribing appropriately, making sure there's necessity and an evaluation of side effects for these patients, it could be a licensing issue if there's a bad outcome.
Right, absolutely. That's the biggest thing I am concerned about with some of our clients who may dabble in this area. It's become extremely lucrative and popular. I mean, you can barely, look online on Facebook and not see multiple ads for this. So that's definitely something to think about. If you're a provider wants to get into this business, feel free to reach out and we can help you kind of come up with a viable approach that protects the practice. Certainly don't want to create liability for your practice just to get in on it. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
And from the other side, again, we don't usually kind of preach on the consumer side of things, but there are spas and other non-licensed medical providers and businesses that are getting their hands on this and trying to get into this business. Be aware that you want to see a licensed physician who's licensed in your state, whether online or in person. You want to make sure anybody who's dispensing to you is licensed. You want to make sure the drugs are being acquired from an approved compound pharmacy if they're not the original FDA approved medication. So, buyer beware here. I think sometimes people are just excited for the potential weight loss and they're not doing their due diligence. It's not that difficult to find a provider that is legitimate and is operating in compliance with the law. And there's plenty of them who are
absolutely
plenty of them who are still willing to do it, even if it's more of a minimal weight loss, let's say that you're looking for where you wouldn't necessarily qualify, for regular, drug to be supplied to you. So, all right. Any other thoughts on this topic?
No, other than, it can be done. It just needs to be done properly.
Right. And we're only starting to see the repercussions from both liability standpoint as well as lawsuits against healthcare practices. So if you have already started doing this, it does not hurt to have whatever you're doing reviewed, your informed consent forms reviewed, where you're getting your drugs from reviewed, how you're promoting it reviewed. So it's never too late to just take the precautions to make sure that you haven't gotten yourself into a situation. It can be fixed. So, all right. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm Ericka Adler. This is Christina Kuta, and this is the Health Law Hotspot. We'll see you next time.
The Roetzel Health Law Hotspot is made available by the firm and its attorneys for educational purposes and to provide general information, not to provide specific legal advice. Use of the Roetzel Health Law Hotspot does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the firm or any of its attorneys. The Roetzel Health Law Hotspot should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice, and you should contact an attorney in your state about any legal needs or questions you may have.